Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley, How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from the introduction. Sergio, a friend of mine from Argentina, recently completed a trip around the world. I met him last year in southern Mexico, where I'd been visiting regularly since 2016 to learn from indigenous communities who have been creating their own digital networks. My visits there were inspired by my too long decade fascination with the internet and digital technology's rapid development. First as an engineer and later as an educator and researcher, exploring how digital technologies impact the lives of diverse cultures and societies. Sergio had not traveled extensively outside of his country before. When we met at a food vendor's table on a street in Oaxaca, he was buzzing with the excitement of having visited 5 continents and holding various jobs as a carpenter and farmer, for instance, or in the service industry at hotels and restaurants in just the past year. When I asked him about his range of experiences in parts of the world so different from where he grew up in working-class Buenos Aires, he made an offhand remark that stopped me in my tracks. Regardless of where you go, he said, people get pushed into the internet. That is what they want. After we parted ways, Sergio's comments stayed with me. I was struck by the contrasting but intertwined images it contained. The first being of people thrust into some alternative universe that exists beyond our screens. The second being of people who relate to the internet as a place where we share common ground. Like many of us, Sergio had the perspective of a user, simultaneously awed but also perplexed by the characteristic pushiness in which websites, mobile apps, virtual reality headsets, and a myriad of other digital devices have appeared and made their way into our lives. I wrote this book as a way to explore how we, the billions of internet users, can respond to the sea change that transformed an open world of online possibilities into something else altogether, a digital landscape of walled gardens and predetermined paths already programmed for us, for which we have little visibility or control. If we're going to turn over our lives to these devices and systems, shouldn't we, at the minimum, have power over how they're designed and profited from? Shouldn't technology be people-centered, not in use and addiction, but in creation and application? As access to the internet and cell phones expands around the world, so too does the power and wealth of but a very few technology companies located on the west coast of the United States and in China. These companies offer services that have, without question, created value for their billions of users, providing efficient and economical ways for us to find and disseminate information, telecommute to our jobs, socialize with one another, and buy and sell goods. Many of us love the cheap prices on Amazon and how quickly the products we purchase arrive at our doorstep. Others believe that things like surveillance cameras, GPS tracking of people using smartphones, and the use of shared data to apprehend terrorists provide great value. But we may not also recognize that in the process we give up our individual rights to privacy, put our most vulnerable members of society at risk, threaten the viability of small businesses, and contribute to greater economic inequality and political division. In domesticating the wild west of the internet, the big tech companies have provided a vibrant market of beneficial tools and services for users and amassed unimaginable wealth for their executives and stockholders. But in the process, they have also supplanted the open democratic internet with a vast network of privately owned architecture. Imagine digital fences, highways, roads, bridges, and walls whose sole purpose is to control people's movement through digital space in ways that benefit their company's bottom line. Clinging to this idea of an open internet obscures the reality. The digital world is structured by static, hefty, and inflexible digital architectures. And like invisible borders, they enforce specific paths. We are increasingly aware, of course, that the phones and websites linking us to a wider world keep track of us, even when we're not using them, and that our personal data is vulnerable to covert collection and monetization. We have also experienced the amplification and rapid spread of propaganda, misinformation, and hate speech on the internet, too often with tragic results, all of which distract us from facts, contexts, and multiple points of view. Meanwhile, journalists, activists, scholars, and more of the public are raising concerns that Chinese, Western, and white male interests dominate the content and systems that power the internet, rather than those who reflect the full diversity of all of us who are online. Finally, against the backdrop of profound economic inequality around the world, we have seen how the expansion of the gig economy has made work, wages, and benefits less secure than ever before, even as digital automation threatens to eliminate much of the current job market. I, like so many of us, derive incredible value from the services and products provided by Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook. But I also know that I've agreed to their terms of service without understanding exactly what I have given up in exchange for what I am getting. I am not being given the means to think through the downstream implications of my actions, even for myself, much less for others in my networks. As an example, Amazon has made it so inexpensive and easy to buy almost anything that almost all of us use the site regularly. The Chinese Alibaba is no different. But is it okay that both these companies have monopolistically overtaken an open marketplace? The book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more. In peace there's nothing so becomes a person as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of this adventure blows in our ears, then imitate the tiger. Stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, set the teeth and stretch the nostril wide. Hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to your full height. For there is none of you that hath not noble luster in your eyes. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge cry, "It is Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Show." My name is Jefferson Smith, and it is my last day. Thank you, and apologies to the Bard. Tom will return to you on Monday. What subjects should we broach, dear friends? It is Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Show. The call-in number today is 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925, and it is Anything Goes Friday. A free-formedly creative respite from the typically titanium-knuckled-handed strictures of our usual format. A permissible cacophony at the conclusion of a week of our otherwise strictly synchronized and regimented chorus. Perhaps a somnolence from the draconian vociferating. Some stuff that's happening. There's a New Hampshire debate tonight. What would change your mind? You know, at this point, most of us, I shouldn't say most, there's a lot of people who are still figuring it out. If you're one of those people, and I don't mean, the difference between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders seems hard for me to make up my mind regarding. But if something would make up your mind, something would change your mind, something would impact your view in the debate tonight, what might it be? What should we be listening for? What are some elections around the country that we should be paying attention to? Yesterday, we went through the U.S. Senate races, the most hotly contested U.S. Senate races. We might go over a couple of more. What are the state legislative chambers that are up for grabs? 2020 is redistricting. 2020 will decide what the congressional map looks like for the rest of the decade. Where are the legislative chambers, where are the governor's races that will impact that? What are topics of democracy that we failed to cover this week that we should make sure we at least give a nod to? I posted that question online. There were folks who wanted to hear about and wanted me to plug the Poor People's Campaign. That'd be something to talk about. We'll do a little watch your language. What are words you're hearing out in the world? What are parts of the parlance? What are elements of discussion that you think we're picking the wrong words? If words matter, what words should we be using to replace them? What's happening around the world? What are examples in Berlin or Paris that might be things that this country or that towns could learn from? If Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump don't want to learn much from data and from experience that isn't funded by a highly paid lobbyist, what might we learn from activists and policymakers who are trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number? What's happening around the world? Also, how do we secure our elections? How do we make sure that the 2020 election is one that has and engenders greater trust than the 2016 election? What do you think we should be talking about? Let's go straight to it. It is Anything Goes Friday. Heck, I'm wearing a denim shirt. Never worn a denim shirt on TV before. Anything goes. Apparently denim goes. David from WGRN in Columbus, Ohio. How you doing?
Good. I have serious issues with the current Democratic leadership.
How come?
It's hard to know whether they're succeeding or failing or flailing around. I just would like to see an inclusive Democratic leadership that pulls in everybody instead of just talks about corporate success and which
Democratic David, which Democratic leadership are you speaking to?
The national.
Right, but which people are only talking about corporate success?
I feel like the DNC and groups like that, all they want is money. I volunteer for going door to door, helping out Democrats, handing out stuff. But then I don't feel like I'm part of anything. I don't feel like they want my opinion. I don't feel like they want me. They just want my hand to hand out stuff and talk to people. And, I would like to feel like it's a group that's helping the poor, it's helping the average people, it's helping improve minimum wages, instead of talking about, corporate stuff. I'd like to. But I want to.
So I hear about, and first of all, I think one of the smartest things I've heard this week is, and it connects with a friend of mine was advocating for a while, has been advocating for a while, saying that that a political party should be, to a greater degree, engaged in direct service, should actually be manifesting its values in work that it does. Actually, if it says it cares about homelessness, well, work to change political power, but also maybe do a little direct service to just express those values. It's an interesting idea. But I do want to poke at that thing when you say, well, the Democratic leadership only talks about corporate stuff. I guess I want, if I think about the speeches from the people I think are the most highly ranked Democrats in the country, I hear vastly more about healthcare. I hear vastly more about assaults on democracy. Heck, I hear vastly more about trying to hold a president accountable. And I'm not hearing as much about corporate stuff, but I do hear a lot about fundraising.
Well, the leadership is still voting for big defense budgets.
Yeah.
They're still repressing the Central and South America. They're still in that Cold War mentality. I don't think that even makes any sense. We need to have a Democratic leadership that understands the world, not just what makes money for them as far as donations from lobbies.
Well, David, I really appreciate your call. Thanks so much for calling. It is Anything Goes Friday. Linwood from Gordonsville, Virginia. Go ahead.
What's up, brother? How's it going?
It's going good. How you doing?
I'm still learning.
Likewise. Well, that's a great answer. That's one of my favorite answers to that question ever.
Thank you. But what I'm calling today about is the decorum of the state of our union.
Yeah.
The tackiness of the Republican Party in giving the Congressional Medal of Freedom to Rush Limbaugh during that State of the Union address. It shows that, well, we don't really want to cater to the United States. We just want to cater to those Americans who agree with us. And so when Nancy Pelosi ripped the speech up, I'm not mad that she did it, because the way that he'd been disrespecting them the whole time, he didn't shake her hand. Hell, he didn't even shake the vice president's hand. And then he came in the prayer breakfast the other day. I think that, me personally, I don't know. I'm not trying to start no rumors. I think the man's on drugs, because he kept sniffing every few seconds, every sentence. I think he was on a narcotic.
Yeah, there have been a bunch of people who have suggested similar things. I'm not in a position to weigh in on it. I do think that was the speech of a. This maybe gives it too much credit. Well, a critic would call it a cult leader, a proponent, or maybe the almost neutral observer might call it a movement leader, and recognize that the Trump strategy is a simple one. It is tit for tat, is reward your friends, punish your enemies. It is a strategy that when one is armed with nuclear weapons is a really dangerous strategy. It is a habit for a government that has meaningful weaknesses. And ultimately, giving an award to Rush Limbaugh demonstrated rewarding one's friends in high order.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's Anything Goes Friday, 202-808-9925. And we're back. You're listening to Free Speech TV, and thank you for doing that. Robbie from Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray. Thanks for doing that.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well.
I wanted to. I was listening to you earlier this week here, and I just got to say it's completely. I don't know if it's your cognitive dissonance about the Democratic Party, but to assume that it was like a technical difficulty.
You think Iowa's rigged?
Votes. Of course. I mean, well, yeah, you have. That's the topic that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
But
what do you think?
Legitimately assume that it was just a technical difficulty in the app that Pete B.
I don't know.
To spend $42,000 on that was developed by ex-Clinton staffers. How can you say that this is not an election rigging? Are you really?
I don't know.
Are you just? I mean, here's the thing. Why is it okay for Democrats to do it? Which, ironically, Nancy Pelosi, who, for whatever reason, we all knew Trump was going to be acquitted. We all knew the vote wouldn't pass. She hesitated. She held off submitting the articles for impeachment, which, ironically, when his address, when the acquittal happened.
Robbie, and I know, and you and I remember now, you and I, the last time I was on afterwards, you asked if I would spend some time on the phone with you, and I did. We spent an hour together, and maybe a little better than that. And I did have a chance to listen. I appreciated you spending the time. And I came away from that, and I know and share some of your deep frustration with the state of power in the United States. I don't share some of your feeling that if one's first choice candidate isn't there, that it's better, that there is.
That's not what I said. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you think the Iowa election was rigged.
But I wanted to ask the second thing you were saying about Pelosi. How do you connect that to how is that connecting to the Iowa thing, or is that just a separate frustration?
Because the Democratic establishment, the people that call on this show all the time and try to complain about the Democrats, that people, I don't know. So when I'm critiquing the Democratic Party, it's because I see that mass conglomerate wealth, as you like to describe it, being in control, and they would rather have 4 more years of Trump than a Sanders administration.
And what's the evidence you see?
Rigging.
And so that's what's to you what's connected to Iowa.
Hang on, they rigged the election again, just as they did in 2016. Did you see the coin toss with the Pete B who won?
Sure. And what's the rigging?
I'll explain.
So the rigging
this. Listen to how we are dealing with this impeachment. Out of all the things that they could have gotten him for, with the emoluments clause, forcing people to meet, government officials to meet at the Trump Towers, is a direct violation of the emoluments clause. They could have investigated that. they get this bull crap of, election.
So is it your case, Robbie? Is it your case?
Hold on. I want to finish my point, though.
No, but I want to. At some point we got to have a little back and forth. I want to understand what your point is, because I thought it was about Iowa, but now are you saying that the Democratic Party was trying to protect Donald Trump?
They would rather have Trump than they would see a Sanders in the administration. And considering that Bill Clinton called and told Donald Trump to run, Nancy Pelosi, hold on, I wanted to finish my point here, which is that they could have got the impeachment out of all these things that would have actually had substance. This is how they were trying to get him back into there. And that was an election rigging. That was an election rigging that tried taking place. The Iowa Democrats changed the vote.
We're going to break, Robbie, and I do want to take a chance to respond. Thanks for the call, and thanks for being a listener. It is Anything Goes Friday. I'll respond after. I don't think the Democratic Party wants Donald Trump to be elected president. I don't agree with that.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
Welcome back, everybody. Listen to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in. Honored to do it. Tom will be back with us on Monday. It is Anything Goes Friday. Big week. Big week. We've had town hall meetings. We have a debate in New Hampshire tonight. We had, the week started with the Super Bowl, and this weekend will be the Oscars, and that is bracketing a significant debate over the fate and the future of democracy. Let's go to, I'm not sure if it's Kano or maybe Keno from Lakeland, Florida. Thanks for calling.
Yes, I'm the Republican moose herder who wants reform in the Republican Party.
All right.
And I have some advice for Amy Klobuchar in the debate tonight. This country needs a cyber war rules of engagement with Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And if she will make that as a priority, that'll win her some support, because that's what we need in this country. And if she will talk about the qualities she will use in choosing her vice president to balance her for yin and yang powerful energy to complement her, she will win a lot of points. And then we'll get some Republicans that will go with her, because eventually the Republicans are going to say, oh, Donald is obnoxious. Donald has overreached. And so they'll use the 25th Amendment, and President Pence will have to take over, because Donald's mind is going bad, and he'll get so outrageous and so obnoxious, and they'll say, and President Pence will have to come in, and they'll have to use 25th. And Tom says that there's only one way for the vice president to take over in the 25th Amendment. But I think Tom's wrong. There's two ors in the Section 4 that says, or such body as Congress shall appoint. So Congress, when some of the Republicans figure out that Donald is off his beam and needs to be retired, then they can use the 25th Amendment and put in President Pence. But in the meantime, Amy Klobuchar, if she'll say that we need a cyber war rules of engagement, that because Russia could knock down our electricity system, and we need to talk.
Let me respond to that one. Is it Keno or Kano, sir?
Like key that unlocks the door? No, Keno.
All right. Well, I think the key is yes to what you're saying in that first portion. I do think one of the things I like about that, and thanks for making the phone call. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. The call-in number is 202-808-9925. I think there's a number of things in the debates that have been a significant focus. During the break, we got a call from someone who thinks that the Democratic Party would actually sort of prefer to see Donald Trump elected than Bernie Sanders get elected. I will acknowledge I don't know what evil lurks in the hearts of all people. For the people of rank in the Democratic Party that I don't know anybody that wants to see Bernie Sanders be defeated by Donald Trump. I don't know anybody like that. And I don't know anybody who wants Donald Trump to be reelected, regardless of who the Democratic nominee is. I'm not saying those people don't exist. I just don't know them. I do know some people who are still in pain around 2016. I know some people who feel abused by supporters of some candidates in this race. Many women who feel that they have been just electronically tongue-lashed by the supporters of at least one candidate. But that's not, and there's been so much focus, I think some of it was to knock down Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in the previous debates by major media, including focusing so much on the disagreements around health plans. There was lots of focus on that. That's an important issue. I don't mean to cheapen it as an issue. In fact, healthcare is the most important issue, according to 40% of Americans, by plurality of voters in the Democratic primary and of voters generally. It is the biggest policy issue facing the country. But the view of the Democratic presidential candidate is not going to be the governing view of what passes. We've got to consider Congress. But the kind of thing you were talking about, Kino, how do we prioritize national security matters? How do we protect ourselves with respect to cybersecurity? Negotiating tougher agreements on things like cybersecurity? That's the kind of stuff a president can do. That's real stuff. That's relevant stuff. Healthcare is relevant too. But I would like to see in the debate tonight some focus on the powers that a president actually has, not just what they wish that a Congress and a Supreme Court would go along with, but what they could actually do as president. That would be really great. Stephanie from WCPT Ain't Afraid of Me. Go ahead.
Hey, afternoon. I wanted to address the guy who said he felt like he was almost disenfranchised from the Democratic Party.
Sure.
Because he wasn't up front, I guess. What we do down here in Chicago, I live in Pembroke, and we have the largest concentration of black organic farmers in the country.
Nice.
And what we're doing is we're teaching people how to be independent as they possibly can be. We are teaching people to grow food.
And where do you grow? Is it?
Yeah,
go ahead. Keep going. I was going to ask you the question you're about to answer, which is where do you grow it?
Well, if you can actually grow it in your backyard, if you got a balcony, you can grow on your balcony. I have a friend when her kids went to college. She did grow lights and grew food that didn't need like bee pollination and some leafy plants, and she grew them in her house all winter.
Stephanie, this is brilliant. How did you start getting engaged with that, with teaching people to do more urban farming? How'd you get started, and why'd you get started?
Well, one of our farmers down here met with the Illinois Coalition of Hunger.
Yep.
And so, people are talking about the food deserts. It's not just black communities that have the food deserts. If you go south of Chicago to Kankakee, and you go there's plenty of stores and stuff. But if you go south of Kankakee County, which is 70 miles south of Chicago, towns for the next 100 miles, some only grocery stores they have are dollar stores, and there are no fresh vegetables in there.
No, and this is not just a Chicago thing. This is something that's relevant to everybody. It's places all around the country. This is true in Detroit. This is true. This is even an important issue in the district I used to represent in eastern portion of Portland. If you go to the ex-urban South, there's a lot of places that face food deserts. Keep going.
Yeah, but you also have them in the West. You go through New Mexico, and you got towns of small people. And so what he can do is teach people to combat. If Trump cuts food stamps, teach people to grow food so that they don't starve.
Amen, Stephanie. This is an inspiring call. Thank you so much. It also impacts safer communities. When you have gardens in front yards, it means more people are out looking at the street. It improves safety in streets. There's so many benefits from urban gardening. Thank you so much for that call and for doing a little inspiration. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything is going. It's 202-808-9925. Grow yourself an urban garden.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until At last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming, and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Health care is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve healthcare and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Information is there.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. Desiree asked a question offline, emailed it to me about a quick thing I rattled off when we were doing speed round. I rattled it off fast because it was the speed round, and is an easy way to understand at least the biggest bulk of the federal budget. Every time you hear somebody bloviate about shrinking the federal budget, and what they're talking about is, we should shrink foreign aid, or food. Oh, we got to cut SNAP. We now know that Donald Trump has proposed new rules that are going to hurt poor people and take people off their benefits. And each time there is this bloviation, they're talking about we got to shrink the government. We got to make government smaller. Let's talk about actually what the government spends on. Give or take 3/4, varies between 70 and 80%. Give or take, ballpark 3/4, the federal budget goes the following 5 things. If you're not talking about these 5 things, you're not really talking about impacting the size of the federal budget. And these are the things, by the way, not only these things are popular, but it also bears on the question of whether Donald Trump will in fact go after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, as he said he would not in 2016, but has already put out plans that do. He also said he wouldn't go after Medicare or Social Security during his State of the Union address, and I think we know that that could be the 16,000th and first lie to pile atop the stack. But in response to Desiree, here are the 5 things. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, service on the national debt, and the U.S. military. I'll say them again for fun. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, service on the national debt, and the U.S. military. For discretionary spending, some of those things are locked in. They call them entitlements. They're entitled in the budget. For discretionary spending, military spending is a little over half of that. So if you're not dealing with those things, you're not really impacting the federal budget. And the tricky deal is, the challenge that Republicans have had over the last 40 years is that they say lower taxes, but they don't really want to suffer the political costs. They would like to do it if they could avoid the political costs. So they're trying to do it slowly to throw people off Social Security, privatize Social Security. They've certainly tried to do that. Slash Medicare instead of expanding Medicare to more people or to everybody. They are working to cut and have cut Medicaid because, that's clearly just poor people and not older people, which include maybe some donors. So that's just a handy thing to keep in mind, that and one of the challenges, to just finish that point, that they've faced is that when they run on slashing the budget, or when they run on shrinking government, or they run on lower taxes, the way to pay off the lower taxes is just a deficit spend. To cry about national debt if a Democrat is in office, but when they're in office, cut taxes for people in the upper income levels, and then do that just by jacking up the national debt. It was the same thing under Reagan. It was the same thing under Bush, and it was the same thing under Trump. It's a standard move. And there are some, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are true ideologues within the Republican apparatus who would like to slash Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. It's just been tricky to get all the votes in Congress to do it when members of Congress have to stand for re-election. But anyway, that list, Desiree, is a handy list to remember. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, service in the national debt, U.S. military. Also want to respond to Robbie. You asked me, do I think that the Iowa caucus was rigged? I don't know. What I've been just saying is I want to rely on a paper record. It is a reminder that I want a paper record in every election. I am grateful to live in a state that has vote by mail. I don't think vote by mail is all of the answer, but I think you add vote by mail to automatic voter registration, to good election monitoring, to a good system of democracy, and having that paper record gives me some could you still rig an election? Sure, in some respects. But if you have that paper record, it makes it harder. Josh from Knoxville, Tennessee, you're on the air.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks. I appreciate it. I wanted to say a couple of things real quick. Out of Iowa, it was a catastrophic, failure for the Iowa Democratic system. I mean, it was and we saw that unfold. But I'm not a Mayor Pete supporter. I am a former Republican who has swung far progressive.
Thank you.
Bernie's my candidate. I would gladly settle for any number of the non-Biden candidates, but I believe as an ideology, as varied as we are from the Klobuchar Biden side to Mayor Pete to Bernie and Liz, I keep hearing vote blue no matter who, and I love that. I love the idea of beating Trump, but Iowa, the state of Iowa, they stood behind an openly gay candidate, and I think that for America is a pretty cool thing.
It's a pretty big deal. I appreciate that. We've been knocking Iowa and what happened in that caucus all week, and we haven't been knocking them as much as the rest of the media in the discussion. We did have a chance to talk to a journalist on the ground there who likes the caucus and advocated for it, and he made an important point. My wife repeated the point that we can knock, and I did, and I still do knock the very first State of the Union. You saw the entrance polls, 91% of the voters were white voters. It's just not a representative sample, not only of the country, but certainly not of Democratic primary voters. But if you look at the last three, and let's call Bernie and Pete Buttigieg, roughly speaking, a tie in Iowa at this point, based on what we know. I'm calling it, roughly speaking, a tie. But if you call Pete Buttigieg the winner, the first African American president, the first woman to get a major party nomination, and the first openly gay candidate for president, each won Iowa. So I agreed. It's interesting. We got to at least include that as we knock around Iowa.
One other thought from this week.
Yeah.
And I by trade, I have other things to do. I'm a licensed teacher, but I have, disclosure, not taught full-time in a classroom, but I have studied extensively the government and the Constitution, James Madison, and it's one of those things that I defend a lot. And I've studied some of the great speeches in American history.
What are your favorites?
From Webster to after Monday, or after earlier this week, I think Romney's going to be up there.
It's a big one, isn't it?
Listen, for history, when I'm looking at a classroom, and I hope to God one day I get to teach in a classroom.
Yeah.
Maybe not history in the South, but I'll teach somewhere. That I want to be able to stand up and teach the courage behind that, and how in the state of affairs, what it took for him to stand up, and not only stand up for his ideals. And normally I'm a separate the church from the state, keep your stuff to yourself. But the way he pulled his faith in is the way that I want my leaders to pull their faith in. And I've always been critical of Romney. I've not been a fan even when I was a Republican. But that I have not. I've not been moved to tears as an American in a really long time.
It was courageous. It was courageous. I agree with you. And Josh, thank you. Josh from Knoxville, thank you so much for the call. It is worth pointing out, and it's worth teaching people. And to the Laura Ingrams of the world and the right-wing apparatus who came after him saying, oh, he's preening, self-involved, somehow trying to serve himself. To almost paraphrase him, does anyone think that he would have done that, cast that vote, given that speech, if it hadn't been for the seriousness with which he took his oath? Does anybody really think that was some political move? I mean, yeah, he might have had included some silver lining political calculation that, maybe he gets to be a better footnote in history. But is that really, is that selfish? I don't know. It's not my definition of selfish. Maybe if the Republican Party around Trump starts collapsing because the fraud just gets too embarrassing, that maybe they want some standard bearer to stand up and he can be that person. I'm not saying there are no political calculations that could be included, but does anyone really think? I mean, heck, he had one of his family members is the head of the Republican Party, his niece. He was getting pressure not only from donors, not only from the chattering class, not only from the Twitterati, not only from Fox News, not only from the Drudge Report and Laura Ingraham, not only from the president of the Blither in the United States, but his own family. I appreciate the call. Pam from Charleston, New Hampshire. Go ahead.
Hi, Jefferson. How are you?
I'm well.
I have a response to that one caller that said everything is rigged. There were only two people in 2016 that said it was rigged. It was Bernie and it was Trump. And that's going to discourage people from wanting to vote. And as far as Iowa, there was that big report, and it happened in New Hampshire in 2004 about this phone jamming. And a bunch of Republicans phone jammed 4chan and everything else in Iowa. They phone jammed so nobody could call those phone lines. It's been reported, it's come down, and I'm just tired of everything rigged. If you don't get the candidate you want and trash the Democratic Party. Bernie didn't want to join the party. He wanted to blow it up. And I cannot vote for him, and I apologize in advance. So thank you very much.
Well, Pam, I want to appreciate the first portion. I want to quibble with the second. That if I were going to try to ensure that a pro-democracy coalition did not win, one thing I would do is convince everybody the whole game was rigged. The other thing I might do is rig the game. Another thing I would do is make it my way or the highway and make it hard for coalition to come together. We need a coalition to come together.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show, 202-808-9925. Unity, baby, unity. We're on Free Speech TV from Cindy, watching on Free Speech TV. Hello, Cindy.
Good morning, Jefferson. I'm calling to encourage all your listeners and viewers to be sure to watch Democracy Now! From this morning.
Great.
Amy Goodman interviews journalist William Arkin on his article appearing in the Federation of American Scientists, and it's titled, scarily, U.S. deploys new low-yield nuclear submarine warhead. And that's just some pretty scary stuff, and there has been, no coverage I've seen on the corporate media.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for that, and thank you for the plug for Amy's show, the Democracy Now! Show. You can find lots of places, lots of times. And thanks, Cindy, for calling. And it is one of the places that is undercovered is how we, and I actually want there to be embedded within the Republican Party more fiscal watchdogs there. At the state level, what we see is all too often Republican fiscal watchdogs call themselves fiscal watchdogs if Democrats are in charge, but then don't watch prison budgets, don't watch public safety budgets. They'll watch all the other budgets. They'll criticize education budgets, healthcare budgets, etc., but not public safety budgets. It's the same thing in the federal government, that the military budget ends up feeling sacrosanct. And watching what is happening is hugely important. I appreciate you calling. I won't belabor it further. Richard from KBCS in Bellevue, Washington. Hello there.
Good morning, Jefferson. It's another happy Friday in Trumpistan.
It is another happy Friday. I'm glad you're happy.
Gotta be happy one way or another, or we're not going to get it done. I'm calling to express my fear about what I'm thinking about as the impending doom of a re-inauguration of Donald Trump in next January.
Yeah,
it's a real concern. The deal there, though, is that the Republican juggernaut only needs him for that long, and after that, they have their pieces in place to be able to do what they need to do for whatever the next 4 years are that he would have been reelected for. And so I'm feeling that he's not gonna go ahead and stick it out for another term. I think he's going to resign for health reasons, and I think he's going to sue our country.
Yeah, I can't speak to. I'm not in a good position to evaluate either of those conjectures. Thank you, Richard, for the call. I can respond to the first one. That I do think that there is a meaningful risk of Trump's reelection. Anybody who thinks that the choice, the Democratic nominee, that whoever is nominated, it's just a fait accompli that they're going to win. It's going to be a hard deal. Historically, when unemployment is low, when the stock market is high, this is why Newt Gingrich was saying 3 years ago why they needed to do the kind of stimulus that Republicans like to do. When Democrats win, that's the kind of stimulus they like to do tends to be more like infrastructure, more like bottom-up stimulus, not as strongly as some people in our community might like, but that tends to be the thrust. When Republicans are wanting to do stimulus, they tend to do it by giving tax cuts and tax breaks at the upper income levels. And he was making the case, well, if we do that, then Donald Trump can get reelected, because if there's a decent economy, a strong economy, presidents get reelected. I think that there is a meaningful concern that he'll do that. And if he does that, they get more courts that last for long, lifetimes.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
Welcome, everybody. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. One of the questions that has come up, we are reminded by Iowa. We were reminded certainly during 2016. It started becoming more in the common awareness in 2000, in the wake of the Florida election, if we can call it that, is election securities. How do we ensure that our elections are, in fact, sanctified, sacrosanct, and safe? We have on the line a guest who is going to talk to us about that, Ms. Kornbluh, who's an expert in the field. Please tell us, give yourself an introduction on how brilliant you are on the subject, and then what do we do to ensure our safe elections? Ambassador Karen Kornbluh, are you with us in Washington, D.C.?
Can you hear me?
I can now. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. So, Karen Kornbluh, I really appreciate being on. Thanks so much. I'm at the Digital Innovation and Democracy Initiative.
Yep.
That's in Washington, D.C., and before this, I had been an ambassador for Obama to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the economic standard setting organization, and also worked for him as his policy director in the Senate and wrote the 2008 Democratic Party platform, and have been growing increasingly concerned as somebody who worked on internet policy going way back to the Clinton administration about how the whole online environment has contributed mightily, in addition to what goes on in TV with Fox and Sinclair and so on. But the online environment has really corrupted our media ecosystem. And we saw going into Iowa and then after Iowa what that can do in terms of making people really doubt the information they need as they go into the voting poll, and then also the legitimacy of an election.
What are the vote systems that you're most concerned about? Are you actually concerned more about what's happening at the ballot, at the vote counting, or at this point most of your focus on kind of the voter psychology, the manipulation that happens upon that with bots, et cetera? Where's your focus?
All of the above.
Yeah.
All of the above. So I have a sister organization here that more works on the actual security of the voter systems, and there are a bunch of organizations working on that. I think people are very nervous because of exactly what you saw in Iowa, and then also what we're learning belatedly was going on in 2016 with voter rolls, with the election security systems themselves. There's a lot of danger for what will happen at the voting booth, which is to say nothing of even before that, the purging of the voter rolls and the voter suppression.
Yeah.
And then in addition, I think we're all worried about all of that, and there are a lot of groups working on trying to help address all of that, since we aren't addressing it at the federal level, unfortunately. But then I think there's a big worry about just how people understand what's happening and what the candidates are about, and just like authoritarians in
so let's start
China
there.
and Russia hurt things and flood the media ecosystem, we're seeing that happening here.
So let's start there. Let's start with the psyops. Let's start with the manipulation of minds and Twitter feeds and Facebook posts.
Yeah.
I remember, I'm forgetting her name. There was somebody who used to show up in my feed all the time back in the 2016 election. She was a strong Bernie Sanders supporter, and she would spend most of her time whacking Hillary Clinton and in a scantily clad T-shirt. And then after the primary, she started showing my feed less, and then I showed up my feed some, and she was a Trump supporter. And I learned later that in fact, she was on the payroll of the Russian government. And I realized, oh, geez, that stuff was actually going down. There really were operatives being paid for by the Russian government to impact our elections. What is the manipulation that we should be watchful for? What advice do you give? Either what's happening at kind of your level, former ambassadors working on this and sort of a fancy person, and then what are people doing, should be doing at sort of my level, when I'm just like reading Twitter, and what should I do?
Yeah, great questions, but I'll contest that I'm a fancy person. But so, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which says how close we are to doomsday, they put out a new clock where they said we're 100 seconds to doomsday, which is the closest we've been. And the first thing they cited was disinformation.
Yeah.
Because they said what happens with disinformation is it undermines democracy, it hurts our trust in each other and in institutions, and we're not able to deal with existential threats like nuclear war, like climate. So it's a big, big problem. And we were too late to realize the Russian problem. And now I think we've been too late. We need to catch up fast to realize that a lot of it is coming from in the house right now. The call is coming from in the house. So it's domestic disinformation, not state-run, obviously, but very close to the state. And also that it's not all ads anymore, that now instead of paying Facebook to run a micro-targeted ad, you can also buy a network through a PR firm that will push bots or get a network of people, trolls like you had, to bombard either the news cycle or other individuals. So it's more off the shelf. You're paying third parties. And it looks more convincing than an ad, And what's happened is the truth, the signal that you want to listen for to understand what the truth is, the news media has been completely undermined because all the revenue, that used to go to your local paper from the Sunday Circular, well, all that ad money now goes to the platforms. Yep. And then when you go online to try to read your paper, if they still exist, if they still had the money to stay in business, all these fake sites that a reporter for The Atlantic just called Potemkin news sites, because they look like they're news sites, but they're really content mills that are just to promote a candidate or to undermine a party, are on there looking exactly like reputable papers. So that's the big problem. But I can tell you more about what we can do about it.
That'd be great. Would you stick with us? We've got a break now, but can you come back with us to be with us at the top of the hour?
Wonderful.
Ambassador Karen Kornblue, Senior Fellow and Director of Digital Innovation Democracy at the German Marshall Fund. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. This is The Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Have become the most reliable of Democratic voters, and Republicans have come to depend on the white vote. The book, The Embattled Vote in America, by Alan J. Lichtman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jefferson Smith, here for Tom. He'll be back on Monday, and thank you so much for being with us. Something that a pro-democracy supermajority ought to care a lot about, something around which we should have a consensus commitment, is the security of our elections, making sure that when we cast a ballot, that ballot gets cast and counted, making sure that the discussion that leads up to the casting of that ballot is in fact not manipulated unduly. Helping us think that through is Ambassador Karen Kornblue. She is an expert on election security. And Karen, I got notes in. I got at least one note in that says, this Karen person is so depressing. Maybe I just shouldn't vote. There's no hope. Everything's just rigged. We're all doomed. Ambassador, what do we do about it?
That's exactly the way that the opponents of democracy want you to feel. And that's what, Putin does, and that's what the Chinese do, the Chinese government does, is they flood the information space. They're not trying to convince the average citizen that their version of truth is right. They couldn't possibly. They're just trying to confuse you and make you think there's no point, that no one agrees with you, and that it's hopeless. As you said, there's a super majority of people who support democracy, who support having the truth out there. And so I think it's really important to be aware of the media soup that we're swimming in and to help clean it up.
How do we clean it up?
Yeah. So from a policy point of view, we let a whole bunch of laws get outdated. They work on the offline world to some extent, but they haven't been updated for the online world. What do I mean? Just consumer protection. You're constantly being tricked online. Civil rights, a whole bunch of civil rights laws don't apply online. Some of this voter suppression you were talking about, I would put under there. Public accommodation laws, like people are harassed and driven offline because so much of the disinformation focuses on vulnerable communities. And campaign finance, as you all know, I'm sure all your listeners know, Citizens United was a terrible decision, but it's made even worse by the lack of transparency online. So that's subverted even the deal that was supposed to be part of that. The fact that the news media, local news media, has been totally undermined, and the fact that the platforms aren't accountable. So there's a bunch of stuff we can do. We can update those laws. We should tax online advertising to pay for a new PBS of the internet that supports public interest local journalism.
Yep.
And we need to have more accountability. Citizens, what they need to do is just like offline you need to organize, online you need to organize both. It's all one and the same. So on the far right, what they've done is they conspire with each other. They pick memes. They push them out. They build up their influencers. We need to understand what they're doing, and people who support democracy need to understand how to do that kind of Saul Alinsky type offline organizing work online. But it has to be both. It has to be person to person offline as well as online. It has.
And you want human communication, because then that person's a real person.
Exactly. And so we need to have some kind of verification, so it's a real person. It's not that kind of bot that you thought. So in the last election, you had a troll or a bot that was trying to influence you. Well, there was a site, Blacktivist, on Facebook that had more followers than the Black Lives Matter website, and it gave people wrong information. So we need to make sure that the groups that we join are that the managers are real.
Yeah,
and
sometimes I can tell. Sometimes I can tell if it's like an egg. I think maybe I can tell if they follow 1,000 people, but they have 4 followers. Sometimes I can tell. Like if they're brand new, sort of bots, I can tell. But sometimes the bots are sophisticated. Sometimes they have good profiles. Sometimes they're people who I know and respect who follow them, retweet their stuff, and it can be hard. Are there best sources? And is anybody doing a really good job at identifying who are more likely bots? Anybody we should be following to watch this stuff?
There are a bunch of experts that are in different areas. So like the anti-vax disinformation that's out there, somebody that's really good to follow is Renee DiResta. She's been doing a lot of good work on that. Obviously the CDC, but I mean in terms of the online misinformation. And there are a bunch of different... Hamilton 68, which comes out of the German Marshall Fund, the Alliance for Securing Democracy, looks at what the Russians are up to and what their major sites are promoting. Yep. So there are a bunch of different sites, but we almost need like community watch. Yeah. We need to really be responsible before we share something. And what's unfortunate about the online environment is they make it so easy to be tricked by disinformation and for you to share it.
Yeah, so easy to spread. It's so easy for me to spread the virus, right? As long they could just if they trigger me right, if they can get me, oh yeah, that's one of my hot buttons. They got my hot button. Heck yes, click like, click share, and then all of a sudden I've used my whatever credibility I might have to convince somebody else.
It's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they do. Is they spend your credibility, and so we all need to realize that we're all influencers. And we need to fight against the urge, just like you might fight against eating that cupcake in the office. You need to fight against the urge to share it until you've checked it out, because you're an influencer, and you really have to be super careful. And then we need to build up trusted networks, and that's really like community organizing. And we've and then we need to put pressure on the platforms to be much more transparent, much more responsible, create some friction so it's not so easy to share the bad stuff, some more user interface so we know what we're seeing. It's really like the buyer beware kind of environment, and so we all need to become much more individually.
Yeah, and to help others do it. That's one of the things I try to do now. I'm trying to get in the habit of is if I end up on some thread or I see it, I just try to say, hey, do we have a second source for that? Say, hey, is that sure? In fact, I've talked about this before, but many of my now deceased uncle, who was a hero of mine, would send me stuff. Much of our political discourse back and forth on email was me doing research he probably should have done to help him understand that something he was spreading or asking, at least I appreciated he would ask me about it, that was in fact a trumped up deal. And I hugely appreciate it. Karen, anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
No, I just think that this last point is really important, that we think that media education has to happen to the young. I think the young are a little bit more savvy. It's the older people who are, I think, more credulous. And so we have to help our parents, our aunts and uncles really understand this and think before sharing.
Karen Kornblue, Senior Fellow and Director of the Digital Innovation and Democracy. Thank you so much. Democracy is the struggle.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The call-in line here is 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. And I mean that, by the way. I think this is our chance. If we think that the enemy is the person who disagrees with us some of the time, somebody who has a little bit different health plan, somebody who's, taken some different kind of contribution. To be clear, just as a reminder, I was a Bernie Sanders voter in 2016. I want very much. I recognize the shift that the country has had really since Eisenhower and Nixon, that the whole political power apparatus has moved to the right. I see what's going on. We need a pro-democracy coalition. We need to have a shared clarion call that in this country, the people are in charge. And sometimes we're going to disagree, but let's all agree that in this country, the people are in charge. 202-808-9925. Mark Taylor Canfield on Free Speech TV, you're on the air.
Jefferson, yes, I'm executive director of Democracy Watch News, which is an international nonprofit news organization. And your last guest was so important. Everything that she said, I would reiterate as a member of the media. We need a pro-democracy movement in the United States. So democracywatchnews.org. The Jeff Santos Show is another great progressive network. We could talk more about this if you want to hold me over, but xray.fm is another great example of how progressive media can be a community-sponsored thing in your community. Every city in the United States could do that.
Mark, thank you so much. We'll be right back. This is Tom's Show. I'm Jeff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. My last time into the breach, what subjects should we broach? Mark, it sounded like you wanted to finish your point from Seattle, Washington. You plugged X-Ray, you plugged your organization. I appreciate all of that. Any final conclusion you wanted to offer before I take the next caller?
Well, Thom Hartmann will be in Seattle on February 19th at Town Halls. I encourage folks to go out and support him and his book. The book is important because one of the issues that's not being covered in corporate media, by the way, Jeff, Reporters Without Borders ranks the United States 48th in the world in terms of press freedom. So there are 47 other countries, according to RSF, and they're a really great group that I work with all the time.
What makes this score low? Is it ownership problems? Is it conglomeration problems, or is it something else? Why aren't we in the top 20?
Unlike, places like Russia and China, it's not so much a state-controlled media. It's a corporate-controlled media here. So there are only a few companies that own most of the media, so a lot of voices are not heard. And so some of these issues like voter suppression, things that Greg Powell, a good colleague of mine, has been working on in the purging of the voter rolls in Georgia and other places. The Citizens United decision is another big issue here.
No, but you answered the question that I had, which is that I mean, it jibes with my guess, but what makes us rank lower, why we're 48th instead of a paragon of democracy and media freedom, is the consolidations, the conglomeration of media ownership. And Mark, there's not really, to me, and I almost worry I just make people sick of me saying it. So I've tried not to say it in response to every single call, every single day while I've been here. To me, every single story we have is a media story. Every single story, every single Trump story is a media story. It is how the media has been manipulated, or how it's been owned, or mistakes that we've made in the conversation related to ownership. So not only yes, but heck yes, Mark Taylor Canfield. Plug your website again.
democracywatchnews.org. And also the Jeff Santos Show. He's a true blue progressive. He's been on the air for years, broadcasting from the East Coast. So check him out. He's later in the day, so it doesn't interfere with Tom's show. And he has great guests on all the time. People like Herb Boyd, the editor from Amsterdam News in New York City. He's got Robert Craig from Wisconsin. He's got the Badass Teachers on there. Some really great guests. So
thanks, Mark. I want to make sure I get to the next caller.
push progressive media. It's really important. And also having a president who says that the press is the enemy of the people is another reason why.
Thank you, Mark, so much. Patrick from Long Island, New York.
Hey, Jefferson, how you doing? It's been a pleasure to listen to you this week, filling in for Tom.
Thanks, man.
Quickly, I was very much involved in getting my information online from the period when Bush was president. And I gradually started to see, false stories, blatantly false stories. And after having gone through that experience, what I have decided to do is I basically get my news stories from Free Speech TV.
Yep.
And I figure that you guys have done all the internet searching for me ahead of time, so that I could trust what I hear on TV in front of my face from you guys. The mainstream, networks, not a chance. And the only thing I wanted to quickly say was Mitt Romney had nothing to lose by doing what he did. I respect him. I give him a round of applause. I have no doubt in his faith, but the man could not be hurt by Trump and had nothing to lose by what he did. So thanks anyway, Jefferson. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Patrick. We'll be right back.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
It is Anything Goes Friday today. For me, that meant a denim shirt and a puggle. His name is George Bailey. He's the happiest dog in town. I talked about Senate races. You're a good boy. I talked about Senate races yesterday, some of the key Senate races we should be watching. And I want to run through some of the legislative races, some of the states where chambers are, in fact, up for deciding in this election. And I would say, we spend so much of our attention, and it's important, of course, we spend so much of our attention on the presidential race. But recognize that the delta between Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, heck, the delta between Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, not only is that much less than the difference between any of those people and Donald Trump, but it's also less than the difference between having lines drawn by Democrats versus lines drawn by Republicans, or lines drawn by nonpartisan commissions than lines drawn by right-wing strategists in the next post-census line drawing that's going to happen in every state around the country. It's critical. You can make a similar case around the U.S. Senate. Let me run through some of those legislative chambers. And if people have their favorite sources for this stuff or their favorite ways to go help, you can send that in. You can tweet at us at Tom_Hartmann. You can tweet at me at Jefferson D. Smith. But I just know that as we think about how we spend our time and energy, if you go and devote yourself to a swing district state legislative race, you can have a meaningful impact. That thing's going to be decided by maybe 150 votes. It's going to make Florida look like, in 2000, look like kind of a more decisive election. These races are close because these districts are small. I remember in the state of Oregon back in 2000, that Republicans held a strong majority, big majority in the state house. I think it was 35-25, as I recall, 35 Republicans, 25 Democrats. But the number of votes that was in all of if you looked at the closest districts in the election that just preceded that 35-25, I think it was 1,400 votes. That if you flipped 1,400 votes, that all of a sudden it'd be 31-29 Democrats. And what that would mean, and what that does mean, is then those lines, not only does that mean that education spending, that child services spending, that healthcare spending, the decisions that states make, presidents don't do that, Congress doesn't do most of that, states do that stuff. Not only does it mean those decisions with real human impacts are made with sort of democracy and humanity in mind, but it also means that the line drawing is done differently. So let me run through some of those. The Colorado State Senate, Democrats hold by 3 votes. They need to hold that. Arizona House of Representatives, this is a big one. Arizona, one of the biggest battlegrounds in 2020. Republicans hold the House of Representatives by 2 seats. It would only take a pickup of 2 seats for Democrats to take over the Arizona House of Representatives. The Iowa House of Representatives, if Democrats pick up 6 seats in Iowa, they can pick that up. Kentucky, it would take a pickup of 20 seats, but all 100 seats are available. So if there were a landslide, if there were a sweep in Kentucky, even Kentucky could have a Democratic House. The Maine State Senate is close. Maine, of course, Susan Collins is there. It is an enormous battleground for that reason. Democrats hold the state Senate by 7 seats, and all 35 seats are up. In Michigan, a big state, of course, for the presidential campaign. It was the governor of Michigan that gave the response in the State of the Union address that we talked about the other day. Got a nice note from a friend thinking that we should, in fact, enact a couple of the ideas that I put out there about how to do a response to the State of the Union. I like that idea of actually trying to do that. But in Michigan, Republicans control the House of Representatives by 6 votes. In Minnesota, Republicans control the state Senate by 3 seats. But again, in Michigan, all 110 seats are open. If Democrats win the legislature there, all they have to do is win a bare majority. They control the House of Representatives in Michigan. Same story in Minnesota. 67 state Senate seats up. Democrats need to pick up 3. In Nevada and New Hampshire, the Democrats have a relatively thin margin. They need to hold. North Carolina, only a few more. Don't worry. I know it can be tricky going through a list, but I want us to learn this stuff and be able to talk about it. One of the things I wanted to get done before the week was out. In North Carolina, another huge battleground state. This is, again, the biggest argument for a candidate who can do well in North Carolina, for the folks in this show who aren't big Biden fans, and I hear what you're saying. I hear where you're coming from. The best argument I've heard for Biden, I'm not here to plug him. Best argument I've heard for him is his strength in North Carolina, ability to help beat Thom Tillis, and then help in the North Carolina State Senate and a North Carolina State House, where Republicans hold relatively thin majorities in both places. You could turn North Carolina into a trifecta for Democrats. That is a quick rundown. If we engage ourselves with elections where we can have a real delta, where the dark money is not going to flow in the hundreds of millions, but instead just in the millions, where races don't themselves, race by race, don't cost $1 billion the way I suspect this presidential race is going to cost, whether or not Bloomberg is the nominee, in races where the races are, $100,000, real expensive ones, maybe $1 million, the cheaper ones, maybe $25,000. These cheaper races, you can really have a huge impact. Lynn from Waynesboro wants to say more about internet security around election security. Go ahead, Lynn.
Hi, Jeff. Following up on the discussion you had previously about the second sources and so forth, obviously this is a big problem that people are relying on what they get off of social media.
Sure.
And even in the books that have been written about Trump, the gossip books, and even some of the ones that are more high quality, respected journalists, you can tell that what they say, recorded all these conversations, heard to say this and that. But since we're still getting a second-hand information, and just because there's a second source, it could be someone heard somebody else say whatever. I think we
what's
need
your
to
favorite
educate people.
when you want to help your network, your community, your friends be a little more media aware? What do you recommend, Lynn?
Try to get to do research. Get to the bottom of it, and don't just rely on what somebody said, somebody else said that they heard say. That old telephone game with the kids repeating the information by the time it gets to the end of the line. There's a reason that is not reliable information.
Yeah. Preach, Lynn. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. We'll be right back. It's Anything Goes Friday, the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Want to do a little watch your language after this. What are verbiages that we're seeing that we want to watch for?
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for the Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. This is from Chapter 3, Hunters in Our Schools and Offices, The Origin of ADHD. The earliest theories about attention deficit disorder characterized it as a diseased state that had to do with brain damage or dysfunction. At various times, it has been lumped in with fetal alcohol syndrome, mental retardation, various genetic mental illnesses, psychiatric disorders resulting from early trauma or childhood abuse, and the theory that parental smoking led to fetal oxygen deprivation. Prior to the 1970s, when ADHD was first characterized as a specific disorder, ADHD children and adults were largely treated simply as bad people, even though attentional deficits have been recognized in the psychological literature since 1905. They were the kids who always got into trouble, the James Deans of the world, the rootless and unsettled adults like Abraham Lincoln's father, the Lone Ranger, or John Dillinger. More recent research, however, has demonstrated a high incidence of ADHD among the parents of ADHD kids. This discovery caused some psychologists to initially postulate that ADHD was the result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. They suggested that ADHD may follow the same pattern as child or spousal abuse, moving through generations as learned behavior. The dietary-causing advocates contended that children's their parents' eating habits, and this accounts for the generational patterns of ADHD. Other studies suggest that, like Down syndrome or muscular dystrophy, ADHD is a genetic disease, and a specific gene, the A1 variant of the D2 dopamine receptor gene, has been identified by scientists as the leading candidate. But if ADHD is a genetic disease or an abnormality, it's a popular one, possibly afflicting as many as 25 million individuals in the United States. Some estimates put ADHD as occurring in 20% of males and 5% of females. Other estimates are much lower, hitting a bottom of 3% of males and 0.5% of females. With such a wide distribution among our population, is it reasonable to assume that ADHD is simply a quirk, that it's some sort of aberration caused by defective genes or child abuse? When the condition is so widely distributed, inevitable questions arise. Why? Where did ADHD come from? The answer is, people with ADHD are the leftover hunters, those whose ancestors evolved and matured thousands of years in the past in hunting societies. There is ample precedent for genetic diseases, in quotes, that in fact represent evolutionary survival strategies. Sickle cell anemia, for example, is now known to make its victims less susceptible to malaria. When living in the jungles of Africa, where malaria is endemic, it was a powerful environmental tool against death by disease. In the malaria-free environment of North America, it became a liability. The same is true of Tay-Sachs disease, a genetic condition that hits mainly Eastern European Jews and confers on them a relative immunity to tuberculosis. And even cystic fibrosis, the deadly genetic disease common among Caucasians, 1 in 25 white Americans carries the gene, may represent a genetic adaptation. Recent research indicates the cystic fibrosis gene helps protect its victims at younger ages from death by such diarrheal diseases as cholera, which periodically swept Europe thousands of years ago. It's not so unusual, apparently, for humans to have built into our genetic material protection against local diseases and other environmental conditions. Certainly, Darwin's theory of natural selection argues in favor of such bodily defenses. Those individuals with immunities would survive to procreate and pass along their genetic material. As the human race moved from its earliest ancestors, two basic types of cultures evolved. In the areas that were lush with plant and animal life and had low human population density, hunters and gatherers predominated. In other parts of the world, particularly Asia, farming or agricultural societies evolved. Be it pursuing buffalo in North America, hunting deer in Europe, chasing wildebeest in Africa, or picking fish from a stream in Asia, These hunters needed a certain set of physical and mental characteristics to be successful. Number one, they constantly monitor their environment. That rustle in the bushes could be a lion or a coiled snake. Failure to be fully aware of the environment and notice that faint sound might mean a swift and painful death. Or that sound or flash of movement might be the animal the hunter was stalking, and noticing it would mean the difference between a full belly and hunger. I've walked through forests and jungles with modern hunter types in the United States, Europe, Australia, and East Africa, and one characteristic always struck me. They notice everything. A flipped-over stone, a tiny footprint, a distant sound, an odd smell in the air, the direction in which flowers point or moss grows. All these things have meaning to hunters, and even when walking quickly, they notice everything. Number two, they can totally throw themselves into the hunt. Time is elastic for them. Another characteristic of a good hunter is the ability to totally focus on the moment, utterly abandoning all consideration of any other time or place. When the hunter sees the prey, he gives chase through gully or ravine, over fields or through trees, giving no thought to the events of the day before, nor not considering the future, simply living totally in that one pure moment and immersing himself in it. When involved in the hunt, time seems to speed. When not in the hunt, time becomes slow. While a hunter's ability to concentrate in general may be low, his ability to utterly throw himself into the hunt at the moment is astonishing. 3, they're flexible, capable of changing strategy on a moment's notice. If the wild boar vanishes into the brush and a rabbit appears, the hunter is off in a new direction. The book ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann is there.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. What subjects should we broach? Let's do a speed round so that we can clear the line so more people can call in. People know the rules of speed round. We try to be speedy, and I talk a little too fast. Patricia from Portage, Wisconsin, go ahead.
Hey, I would like to see the mass extinction of 1 million species on the debates tonight because actually we depend on them for almost everything. And you will notice by your own reaction to this call that even progressive talk show people give short shrift to the other 99.999% of species on this planet who are being disappeared by us. And let me just give you one statistic. Sure. 60% of mammals on Earth are livestock for slaughter. 36% are us, and 4% are all the wild mammals left. And they're going fast. You can't get down that low and not have it just disappear.
I want to say those numbers again so people can get them. 60% of all the live mammals on Earth are livestock waiting for slaughter. 30% are humans. The remaining 10%.
36% are humans, 36%. And 4% are all the wild mammals left
4%.
on Earth.
Oh, I did get those numbers wrong. 4% are all the wild mammals combined. So every wild mammal combined on the planet, every koala we're seeing in Australia, every animal that we're seeing that is suffering, every animal that's losing its habitat, you add up all those things, and it's 4% of all the living mammals on the planet.
Right, and 70% of birds are poultry for slaughter, and 30% are all the wild birds left on the planet. If we think we can live alone on this planet, we are crazy. We need this on the debates.
I appreciate it. It is. I've added it to my list. Thank you so much for calling.
You're welcome.
Tom, watching on YouTube, how you doing?
Yes, sir. Yeah, hey, I realize this is going back in history, but my great-grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher in Missouri. Now, this man had a fourth-grade education, but he knew enough to go take his congregation to a black church. They did this every fifth Sunday. It was called a Fifth Sunday meeting, okay? They would have a worship service and then have a picnic afterwards. And I asked a bus driver, the tour company I used to work for, that I couldn't find anything on the internet about it. And I said, how did it happen? He said it happened all over the South because the preachers got together. Okay? Now, admittedly, there weren't black people coming into my, great-grandpa's, because that area was not as progressive. But the town of Hartville that had that black Pentecostal church, they didn't have separate drinking fountains. They were desegregated much earlier than other places, and the worst effects of Jim Crow did not happen there because people blew it off. Okay, so when I see Reverend Reverend Waters, this is very, very encouraging. And I think people just need to reach out to each other. I mean, we depend too much on the internet. We depend too much on just news sources. We need to start talking to each other again. Get out of this
human contact, true organizing. Don't just complain, organize, actually build human relationships. Appreciate the call. We're in Speed Round. Deborah, go ahead from Denver.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to talk about the public option. Thank you. I just want to talk about the public option or Medicare for all who want it, which is the same thing, versus Medicare for all. Medicare is bulletproof. It's Republican proof, and it has stood the test of time. Well, ever since we got Obamacare, the Republicans have been picking it apart piece by piece, and now they're in court trying to destroy it once and for all. So the Medicare for all who want it / public option, it doesn't fix any of the problems that private insurance companies are causing, such as the operating principle to take as much money possible and provide as little health care as possible to make record-breaking billion-dollar profits off of sick people.
Yeah.
Also, you'll only be able to get the public option Medicare for all who want it only if you're not covered by anything else. So the public option Medicare for all is just a ginormous lie. It's like bringing a box of Band-Aids to a broken system that is bleeding to death. So my question to you, Jeff, is if the courts strike down Obamacare in court, then what happens to the public option Medicare for all who want it? Will we be back to square one? I mean, this is something that they should talk about because, and the other thing is...
Let me respond to that. We're trying to be in Speed Round, Deborah, but I do want to respond to your question. Thank you so much for calling. For calling. Where I agree with you is that system of national health insurance, where everybody gets it, I think is the best system. I think that we've seen it in other countries. It's the best system. And I hugely appreciate, and I think if it weren't for Bernie Sanders, you wouldn't have the national debate on this subject that we're having. And I appreciate both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren for trumpeting a system of national health insurance, Medicare for all, universal health insurance. It is one of the better manifestations of government power that one can have. And if you add up all the money that we spend, including the private money, there's no question it would save money. That said, my quibble is I don't think that a public option would be a retrograde, would be a backwards movement. I think a public option would be better than Obamacare without a public option. I still am disappointed and saddened that a public option wasn't included. We're one vote away. One vote away from having a public option in this plan. My other quibble is both of them will be under attack. We're seeing national health insurance under attack by the Tories in Great Britain, and the way they cover it over is by putting all of their emphasis on Brexit and then chipping away at a system of national health insurance. Make no mistake, they'd like to chip it away more. You're right that if everybody's got the thing, kind of like public schools, it is a little bit harder to dump the thing. That said, they still do some chipping away, and we've got private schools, and they've tried to defund public schools in this country. I don't think there's any system you can build that is safe from without having the eternal vigilance of democracy and a pro-humanity voting coalition. I don't think there's anything that's safe. To answer the question that you asked, but agree with your championing for universal health insurance. To answer the question that I heard you ask, if they overrule Obamacare, I think we got a real problem. I want to take that. I want to go further than that when it's not Speed Round, but that's a problem for national health insurance. That's a problem for a public option. That's just a real problem. But if you do it might benefit. It might still allow, if that's what you mean, for a system of national health insurance without some of the levers that they use the courts use to strike down Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. But I won't know that until I see the final opinion. I can say more, but I don't want to violate Speed Round anymore. Arlene, go ahead from Redmond, Oregon.
Yes.
I'm on the phone.
You are on the phone. So am I, and we are together, Arlene.
Okay. I was watching the returns, from the Iowa caucus, and they had James Carville on MSNBC, and he made the statement that he didn't want to see the Democratic Party, the working man's party. And I was floored. And I'd like your opinion on that.
He said he didn't want it to see. It's hard for me to offer an opinion without, I guess this is second source day, without having seen his quote. I don't listen with rapt attention to everything James Carville does.
Well, it was a surprise to me. I'm sure it was meant for Bernie Sanders because, after all, the Democratic Party was the working man's party, and Bernie Sanders represents what the Democratic Party was when I was young, and I'm 82, and I was in my 20s when I started voting, and I really was shocked by the statement because I realized what the Democratic Party has turned into. It's a corporate Democrat. But
I've looked up now, Arlene. I've looked up the comments, what I see, and I can't comment to the whole thing. But I do know the interview you're talking about, and I did actually even see the very beginning of it. I don't view James Carville as sort of my high priest. I don't mean that to knock him, and I don't even know why I mentioned it. But anyway, what I did hear him saying was calling for the Democratic Party to be more relevant and more diverse. If I were going to try to defend his comments, I might say this. If we only think of it as the working man's party, I think we are making a mistake. And if we're thinking of it only as sort of the lunch bucket, white male, Wisconsin voter, I think we are misunderstanding who the modern Democratic Party is. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be fighting for the lunch bucket, hard hat wearing Wisconsin white male voter, but we can't only be thinking about that. Intent's got to be way bigger than that. I'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're getting into the final stretch. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. Such an honor to be with you. 202-808-9925. Judy from Healdsburg, California. You're on Speed Round. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'd like to talk about what no one is talking about today.
Okay.
And this is what has happened to Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and Edward Snowden. I want to tell you, Jefferson, if there was anything right in our country, these people would be honored as heroes. And this is a real problem. At this point, my opinion of the American public is that I think they're more comfortable living with corruption than they are living with truth and honesty. And I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Judy. Lawrence from St. Paul, Minnesota. Go ahead.
Hey, Speed Round. I'm not really sure what that is, but
I think you're Lawrence, but go ahead.
Yeah. What's Speed Round? I'm not sure what.
We just I try to offer fewer comments. We try to get through the comments quickly. I try to clear the board so a lot of callers have a chance to say a little piece.
Oh, okay. I'll kind of be real short here. Anyway, I'll tell you why the Democrats are going to lose and Trump's going to win in a landslide.
Uh-oh.
The Democrats. Oh yeah. We think. I don't know why we think that we still. And you just said in your previous comments. Yeah, we should go out and look for those lunch box carrying, hard hit carrying guys. But that's all we're doing now. But look, this United States of America is fractured. We have one party that relishes a religion, a Trump religion, and we have another party. That's everybody else. Now,
you're a little muffled, Lawrence. If there was, you're coming through a little muffled. If there was one thing you'd like to see happen, what would it be?
Oh, I would like to see happen that we stop trying to go for these voters that would never vote for us and try to get some of these other voters, Hispanics. We need to shore up that base. Hispanics, Vietnamese, South Asian people. Forget about the white voter for this election cycle and just try to shore up the other people, and we'll be successful.
Thanks, Lawrence. And where I won't agree that we should forget about any particular kind of voter, I will absolutely and strongly agree. We got to remember every voter, and the growing elements of a pro-democracy movement not only include but are led by people of color, and I think that is a critically important reminder, and appreciate the phone call. Paul from Portland, Oregon.
Good morning, Jeff. I appreciate your show. Say, I'd like to point out something. I'll move quickly along, but I'd like to point out that the search for truth is a marathon, not a sprint, especially of important truths. And Karen Kornbluh was pointing out that the anti-vax disinformation campaign.
Yeah.
Well, it's just come out very recently that autism is a problem with myelin.
Okay.
Not anything to do with vaccines, but your nerves are coated by something called myelin, and bad things happen when myelin isn't in balance in your body, and autism is either too much myelin coating your nerves or too little.
Appreciate it. Appreciate so much
and
the call, Paul.
20 years later, it's finally sort of coming out.
Yeah.
So you have to be a stout searcher.
And Paul, I'd like that as your final thought, that each of us need to be stout searchers and look at good research and weigh it in the same way that any of us might get frustrated. Like yesterday when a person called in and said, Trump's the greatest. And then I asked her about climate change, and she said, well, you got to read this thing that tells us it's all rigged, it's all trumped up. We got to look at the real research. And if we're going to have democracy, we've got to have hope, we've got to have faith, we've got to have truth, and we've got to work together to make sure that truth is, in fact, has lots of truthiness. We'll be back on Jeff.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I am Jefferson Smith. Dan from Huntsville, Alabama. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, Jeff. Great job this week. I really like your style.
Appreciate
it. So you brought up something about the rebuttals to the State of the Union.
Yeah.
And it ought to be a rally or something. And I think it's a great idea. And how about get Hollywood involved and make it a real production? You got a lot of people on that side.
There are lots of hugely creative people. One of my quibbles, one of my beefs, one of my hobby horses is that there's so many creative progressives, so many, and they're not all Hollywood executives. There's so many creative progressives,
right.
and there's so often a disconnect. One of the reasons I admired Obama's campaign was that he had a greater connection with the creative community. I don't mean like actors donating to his campaign coffers. That's not what I mean. I mean artists. I mean Taylor's Ferry. I mean real. Shepherd's Ferry. Taylor's Ferry is a road in my town. Making beautiful art that relates to the political discussion. When we see our democratic response, I think there's ways we can step up the production value. I absolutely agree with you. John from Aurora, Illinois. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Jefferson, I just wanted to say, I'm kind of tired of the Democrats not playing dirty ball. First of all, I think
wouldn't you be sick of them if they were playing dirty ball? Don't you think a bunch of people would be sick of them if they were dirty? What's the right amount of dirty?
No, this is what I think they should be doing.
Okay.
Take Sherrod Brown. He writes an op-ed talking about how the Republicans, all in private, sit there and tell him how they feel Trump is unfit for office. Well, why not just put on a wire and record all these people saying it, then cut it up, make a nice little montage of it, call a press conference, and press play, and say, okay, now defend this, because you guys have this schmuck in office, and you're not doing anything about it, and this is how you truly feel. And then let that go through the cycle, and let them try to go walk that back on Fox News, because they're sitting there trying to defend the undefensible, and we just need to pull stuff like that out of the playbook. And I think Joe Biden should drop out of the race, go on Fox News, and say, I'm dropping out of the race because, yeah, it was inappropriate, but it wasn't illegal. Well, it's illegal, and lay it out, spell it out how Trump's kids are benefiting, and just put it all out there for these idiots to understand. Because that's the only way you're going to get people to understand is by doing the exact same kind of things. Not illegal, but kind of like...
All right, John, I hear you, and thanks for the call. Let's go to Steve from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing well.
All right, my deal is
the Republicans are purging the voter rolls, right?
Yep.
What if everybody registered as Republican? They wouldn't know who to purge.
It is. So this is your swifty and modest proposal.
Yes, it is. Very, very short and sweet.
All right, Steve. Thanks very much. If it is meant without any tongues and any cheeks, what I would say is part of the challenge. One of the reasons that purging the voter rolls is effective, is so pernicious, is that who we want for democracy really to work. If we want a democracy that works for working people and people who wish they were working, if we want it to work for poor people, if we want it to work for the disengaged and less enfranchised, then we need a system that is easier rather than harder. We need voting systems that have fewer barriers rather than more barriers. The challenge is not, well, people are registering with the wrong party merely. The challenge is how do we keep people engaged, particularly when they're working multiple jobs and they're trying to raise multiple kids when they don't have as much faith in the systems that operate. And why would they? Because those systems haven't benefited them as much. So for me, the priority is not just what trick we might be able to pull as we register to vote, but how do we make the process of participating in democracy one that it's welcoming, one that wants people to participate rather than building walls in front of people's right to participate. Jan from Houston.
Hi.
Hi.
I heard James Carville on the MSNBC the other night,
Yep.
and he said that he didn't want to see the Democratic Party become the Labour Party of the UK, which is virtually dead.
Yep.
And he also said a very scary statistic was that 18% of the population in this country votes for 52 senators.
And he's right.
And,
we have Senate apportionment right now. The U.S. Senate is less representative of the American people than the Electoral College. That right now we have an anti-majoritarian government. We have an anti-majoritarian Republican Party. They spread out a map pretending that vacant lots and land and deserts and forests and farmland vote. Land does not vote. Human beings vote. And that right now we have an anti-majoritarian government and a government that is maybe not coincidentally working, well, I'm going to take away the maybe, that is not coincidentally working to peel back critical elements of having democracy, of having a majoritarian government. Because if you have a system of ideology that benefits too few, well, maybe it makes sense that you wouldn't want everybody participating in that debate. If you can shrink it a little bit, you got a better chance to win. If you can manipulate it more, you got a better chance to win. That is much of the thing. I got a text in about Carville's. He I think said that we thought it was crazy to nominate Bernie Sanders. Thought that would be like what the Labor Party did in nominating their head that did not have broad enough support to be able to win the country, and Boris Johnson was able to win. So I'm now learning more about it. Francis from Pasadena, California. I lived for some years in South Pasadena, California.
Did you? Nice area.
Yeah, in fact, I clerked. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has its biggest courthouse, the one that has the most judges that are there. I clerked for the Ninth Circuit after graduating from law school, and it's based right not too far off Orange Grove.
That's wonderful.
Small world.
People automatically think the Ninth Circuit is like up near San Francisco or something, but no.
And it is the headquarters. Its main chambers are in San Francisco, but more judges in Pasadena because it's got the nicest one. You got about 10 seconds, Francis.
I just wondered if you know what Eric Prince and Blackwater are up to with all these recent international scary things.
It is scary stuff. I need to get more up to speed on the last 6 months, but it is Eric Prince is relative of Betsy DeVos, brother of Betsy DeVos. It's scary stuff. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, "Hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests that we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away." At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters before to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate, interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I am Jefferson Smith. Welcome. Thanks for being with us. This is the final hour I am with you. The final countdown, if you will. Thom Hartmann will be back on Monday. It has been such an honor to be here. A couple things happening around the world. Didn't have a chance to mention, I will mention it now, that Greta Thunberg has been nominated for the Nobel Prize. A couple things happening in other major cities. In Berlin, they are freezing rents, I think, for 5 years to address the growing housing crisis and cost of living crisis in that town. When you have growing wealth disparities, when you have economic growth that is not shared economic growth, where that ends up really manifesting itself is with housing prices, and wanted to shout out what's happening in Berlin. In Paris, the mayor is working to, over time, make the city entirely car-free. Don't know if he'll be successful at that. But that might sound radical, but imagine for a moment how beautiful, how much even more beautiful and more accessible if you provided ways for smaller wheeled vehicles to get around, if you had more bicycles, more scooters, if you had better bus systems, better rail. Imagine how beautiful a city would be if so much of its land wasn't occupied by the automobile that I drove here today. Wanted to shout out a couple things. Wanted also to respond to a caller who wanted to ask about Eric Prince and Blackwater. This is legitimately scary stuff. Eric Prince has close relationships with the administration. His sister is Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. They come from money and are using that money to consolidate power for people with money. He is advocating for the privatization of war. Not only the privatization of weapons, but the privatization of soldiers and strategy. Tease that out a little bit. If the same trajectory of wealth disparities in this country, if we see that same trajectory over another 20 years, use your own timeline. If fewer and fewer people are owning more and more of this stuff, and if it is freely permissible and readily accessible to wield military force based on one's ability to pay for it, what is left for democracy? However you suppress the vote, however you manipulate that vote, however you try to scare people away from it, however you try to fool them into thinking that one strategy is smart for them, dividing a pro-democracy coalition, #NeverWhoever, that even if you have a democratic system that allows for voting, the alarm that I want to sound is if you have private operation, private mechanism of the force mechanism of government and huge wealth disparities, well, that's about as scary as it gets. Let's go back to your phone calls. We got a couple people who wanted to follow up on Romney. Let's start with you, Marilyn from France.
Hello, Jefferson.
Hi there.
Thanks for doing such a great fill-in job. I love it.
Thank you.
So I'm calling about a conversation you had on yesterday's show, which I heard today in podcast, and you were asking people what they were thankful for.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought of was Mitt Romney, because I had just read about that. And then a few minutes later, you had a call from somebody who said, oh, somebody's going to save us, on a white horse. Right. And I immediately thought again about Mitt Romney and how when he was running for president before, there was all this talk about his Mormon beliefs and that he could be the savior on a white horse and all that stuff. And I thought, well, he could save our country by running for president again as an independent. And it would be a selfless act on his part because he probably, in fact, surely would not win. But he would do what Ross Perot did for Clinton and siphon off enough of the Republican vote to put the Democrat in the White House.
I think it's an interesting idea about him running. My agreement would be I do think he would give Never-Trumpers, he would give Republican voters who are sickened by Donald Trump's immorality an option other than Bernie Sanders or Bloomberg to vote for, name your candidate. Where I would quibble is my own analysis. You don't have to trust it. My own analysis is the way I look at the tea leaves of the Clinton election is I think Ross Perot didn't matter. I know that sounds crazy. I think Perot roughly took about as many conservative-leaning voters who might have voted for Bush, who sort of anti-government, anti-progressive voters that voted for Perot, but also there were the anti-Bush voters and took some of those also away from Bill Clinton. So I think when I look at it, the analysis I've read, I should say, is that it was about even, and then you have Bush people and Clinton people both insisting one way or the other, but. There's no assailing that Perot ran, and you're right, Bill Clinton did win. And I also think, if Mitt Romney ran for president, it would have an impact on the election, to be sure, I think. But thank you so much for calling, Marilyn.
Mm-hmm.
Martha, I think you have a response on Mitt Romney from Indianapolis.
I certainly do. I'm very disturbed by all this praise that's being heaped on Mitt Romney. I think it's important for people to understand and to remember who Mitt Romney, who he really is. I mean, and the devastation that he has caused to our manufacturing and our business communities, putting Americans out of work. I'm really sorry that people were fooled by his dramatic pause for effect. When he put his head down and pretended to cry, I didn't see any tears.
You didn't buy it?
No, I did not buy it. Not for an instant. I think this is all staged. I think the more moderate Republicans who are uncomfortable with Trump and his minions, with their actions and their words, I think they've set him up as their savior. And I think this is a really dangerous thing, especially for Democrats calling in and saying, he's such a great guy. I have so much respect for him. Really? Ask some of these people who don't have jobs anymore. Their jobs are now in China or India or wherever.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. Both the Republicans and Democrats have their own methods of election fraud. I mean, we've seen it over and over again, both sides. If it's not voter suppression, then it's Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it's just, they're both the only hope for real change that we have in this country is somebody like Bernie Sanders, ranked choice voting, so we don't have to choose between the two evils and all this crap about the electoral college.
I want to make sure Tom usually has a rule of one important thought per person. I hear the second one of your overall frustration about the structure of the two-party system, et cetera. Let me respond to the Mitt Romney piece, and I guess I'll respond to that second piece. And thank you for the call by saying, yeah, I think that new voting systems make a lot of sense. I think the way to do that, whoever's elected president, they're not going to do that. The way to do that is go to your state, go to your city, go to your county, go to your metro area, and get people together and work to change the voting system in your town. That actually can happen. It happened in one of the Dakotas. I sometimes get them confused. I apologize. They're working to do it in a couple of towns in my state of Oregon. That is something that can happen, whether it's publicly financed elections, whether it's moving to star voting, which is essentially sort of like Yelp voting for politics, or working for ranked choice voting. That's the kind of stuff we can do at the local level. One of the advantages of organizing at the local level, one of the problems of working just on federal politics. You work on federal politics, and then after the election, your high priest or high priestess moves on to Washington, D.C. When you work locally, that legislative candidate, that city councilor, that new nonprofit you started, that community garden you grew, that thing you do in your local community, it stays around. It continues to build infrastructure. It continues to feed and communicate with the other folks. Let me say something about Romney as they music us off. I think it is important to evaluate one another, evaluate the politician in the sum of their acts. And I think that should not be merely the worst of their acts. I think it should, though, still be allowed for us to praise someone in their best moments. It doesn't mean we think a person ought to be president, but we can praise them, I think, at their best moments. I'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith, getting closer to the big finish. Maine from Chicago, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm calling about the economic slavery that we still find ourselves in here, at least in Chicago. On the west side where I'm from,
it's around the country. It's around the country. If you look at, if you're speaking, I know a little bit from the call screener. If you're talking about what's happened with black wealth or what hasn't happened with black wealth, there hasn't been meaningful growth in black wealth since Reconstruction.
Thank you, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And like when I was growing up, the whites and Judeans had the stores in the black community, especially on Madison Avenue, say between Cicero and Pulaski. But now I'm not on the west side no more. I'm on the north side. But when I go back to the west side, I see now that it's Arabs and Hindus. The only thing that stayed the same is the guard. The guard was black then when I was growing up, and the guard is black now. But the monies that are leaving out of our community, and they own those courtway buildings, those big apartment buildings, 10, 11-story courtway buildings. So they're getting all this money is being taken out of the black community, and which continuously put us in economic slavery.
It's a big deal, man. I appreciate the phone call. And without and I don't root against a Hindu. I don't root against an Asian. I don't root against somebody, anybody trying to make progress in their economic life. But the fact that our black community in this country has been not only left behind but pushed behind is one of the greatest sins this country's ever committed. And it's a sin that is not only a sin of my father or my grandfather's generation, it is a sin of my generation. When I was a small child, we were still just getting over redlining, official rules that made it hard for African Americans to get loans. Meant that the black community in my town, it was basically had to rent unless you had enough cash to buy the whole house. Who has all the cash to buy the whole house if you can't get a loan? It meant you weren't getting a house. And that was just one of the examples of keeping down black wealth in this country. A dear friend of mine, Rakaya Adams, gave a TEDx talk on this very subject, and she runs she's a financier. She runs the investment fund for a large trust, and she's an African-American woman, and she made this case very powerfully. You can check it out online, I know, and making the case that woke me up a little bit, frankly. I was a little embarrassed not to know it already, where she showed the graph of before the promise of 40 acres and a mule, how little has been done to elevate wealth in black communities. And if we did, and for those folks like, I'm sick of identity politics. I don't talk about identity politics. Let's talk about wealth disparities. Let's just talk about the gap between the wealth and the poor. Let me say this. If the only thing we did was impact wealth disparities for women and people of color, we would have an enormous impact on wealth disparities generally. And of course, I think we want to raise all of the boats that have been submerged. But I don't think the desire to address wealth disparities broadly and the desire to lift up very specifically the black community, not merely, but very specifically, inclusively, the black community, those things are not at odds. In fact, our struggles are linked together. Our salvation is linked together. We need one another. Maine, thank you for the call. I'm Jefferson Smith. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're not done yet.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. It is Anything Goes Friday. Let's do a speed round, try to clear the calls. This is your show. Let's hear from you. Stella, watching on Facebook from Providence, Rhode Island.
Hi. You were looking for another word for polarity?
Yes, please. For polarized, right, exactly.
Imbalanced.
Great, love
because I think the issue you have with polarity is that it sets up a predicate that you have a binary system, and it's the binary system that is the problem. This is the land that was once lauded as the land of the lively discussion, and we only have 2 points of view. It's insanity.
Thank you so much for the call. I like it. I like imbalanced, and and as I said, in the segments we sometimes do, the Watch Your Language segment, it's not accident, it's crash. There's something that happened. It's not shooter, it's murderer. It is, as we try to use better rhetorical architecture, it's not a estate tax, it's not a death tax, it's an estate tax, or even a rich kid's tax. I like, whenever somebody says, we're polarized, our caller is exactly right. It suggests that pole has a north and a south, or an east and a west on a pole. It's a binary system. And part of the problem is we got to be smarter than that. I know I'm merely amplifying our brilliant caller from a moment ago. Rick from Canoga Park, California.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, I was going to call in yesterday when you were asking about the notes of gratitude that you felt. And the most recent one that I sat and kicked it around and never got to call you, but this time I do. What I'm grateful for is some security in our voting system, and it comes by way of my nephew got into the Navy, climbed all the way up to the top, and he is now at the Pentagon as a director of the Navy Strategic Warfare Innovation Cell. And he passed on this idea of gray zone warfare to explain what's been going on.
Okay.
It's something that
gray zone
Russia
warfare
has been doing. Check into it. It explains what happened at our election in 2016 because, the sabotage that occurred to our electoral college that threw the whole thing out of whack. So it's a form of warfare that the Russians have been employing for quite a while. They're masters at this kind of stuff.
The gray zone refers to sort of the space between war and peace, kind of a different way of saying kind of a Cold War, but a Cold War not based on just military weaponry, but based on information weaponry. Do I have that about right?
That's right. What Kev says about this stuff is gray zone warfare is discussed as a stratagem marked by incrementalism, asymmetry, and deniability.
All right,
that's what we're doing.
Rick,
yeah.
I appreciate the call very much. The gray zone, I'll check more out about it. Brian, streaming on WCPT, Ain't Afraid of Me from Fort Collins, Colorado. How you doing?
Hi, Jefferson. You're not an easy man to get a hold of, I want you to know, but it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Sorry.
So what I called about is division, Jefferson. Yeah. And to me, the most fundamental, concerning problem that we have in this country is that under the influence of Trump, the divisions in this country have grown to the point that he is calling the Democrats evil, and he's completely cleansing, to take his word he might use, the executive branch, and the Democrats are, you just take these comments that he made in the last several days, and in the State of the Union, 40-some-odd% of the country stands up and applauds that, and the other 40-some-odd%.
Yeah, Donald Trump has done more to divide the nation than another president. I think we know that. Am I getting your point, or is there another piece I'm missing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great. And the real question is, how will we ever recover from this? Because I don't see. All right,
let me take that. Let me take that one,
Trump
Brian.
People budging.
Let me take that one. So we know this around motivated reasoning, that when we have attached an idea or an ideology or point of view to our ego, to our self-awareness and understanding, that the attack on that idea, the attack on that ideology, the attack on that point of view comes across as, feels like, an attack on that human being, on their identity, on their ego, on themselves. It does not persuade them. It gets them to lock in. It speaks their amygdala, I must protect myself. And if I'm not the person who's going to run away, then I'm going to fight you. I'm sure as heck not going to change my mind, because if I change my mind, I'm dying because you are attacking me. That figuring out rhetorical architecture, a system, and this is why I want to champion everybody who's called and say, we got to organize. Whether that's building a set of people in our community to grow community gardens, whether that's building a set of people who are going to, own stores so the black community can have more wealth in Chicago or another town, whether that's working together to be precinct people for our local Democratic Party, whether that's working to fight for ranked choice voting in our town, whether that's to advocate for legislative candidates where those chambers matter, whether it's to push for publicly financed elections in cities. You can get that done in so many cities across the country. That working with real people, to get together with real people, to have real human relationships, not to just complain, but as Paul Wellstone said, to organize. I think that is the hope. And when I am communicating, I have a lot of family. Who are very conservative. And I have managed somehow to maintain most of those relationships. I try to put the relationship first, try to love first, be human first, listen first. Doesn't mean I think we're going to agree. Sometimes I'll try to nudge them on stuff. So it doesn't also mean I'm going to always stay silent. If we start by acknowledging our humanity, if we decide together we are committed to democracy, I think we got a chance.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
202-808-9925. We're almost done.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Chicago.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I am Jefferson Smith. Honored to be with you, and thanks for being with us this week. Whose job is democracy? I think I'll answer that question at the end of the show. I made a plug for the Watch Your Language segment just to give some examples. We've watched this, right? The Frank Luntz move, the death tax move instead of the inheritance tax or the estate tax or the rich kids tax, exploring for energy instead of drill baby drill, or plundering the environment for oil profits, opportunity in education instead of gutting public schools through voucher schemes, tax relief instead of investing in public structures, not accidents, crashes I did meet. I want to pick out another one, and that is using the phrase free to describe markets. Are you aware of markets that are free? Every market I go to, it costs stuff. It seems to me that we have private markets, we have markets that can be expensive, but I don't know that markets are free. I think speech can be free. I think free speech is different than purchased speech. And by the way, that one was from a Thom Hartmann listener. Every time I'm honored to be able to host and co-host and be a guest on this show, I learn something, and I learned that from a caller on this radio program. Purchased speech is different from free speech. Let's watch our language. Let's try to have rhetorical architecture that is, in fact, pro-democracy. Carl from Columbus, Ohio, go ahead.
Yes, Jefferson. You're a very gentle, kind person.
I'm trying. I'm trying to. My New Year's resolution for the last several years be less of a jerk. I used to get in fights and be a big jerk as a younger person, and I take that as a high compliment. Don't know if I deserve it, but I'll certainly take it.
Well, a couple of points. You said yesterday that we could call in and thank people on Anything Goes Friday.
Heck yes.
I would like to explicitly thank here in Central Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, on WGRN, Bob Fitrakis. He's a college professor and director of the ColumbusFreePress.com.
ColumbusFreePress.com.
Free press, as in freedom.
Yep.
And so you may have heard of Bob Fitrakis. Harvey Wasserman. Now, you guys have totally missed the black box voting website. There was a Bev somebody. And Harvey Wasserman worked heavily on the black box voting back in the George W. Bush era.
Yep.
And Gary Daniels, who was the last station manager when we had talk radio here in Central Ohio.
Yep.
We now have WGRN 94.1, and I'm proselytizing to get people to listen.
WGRN, Columbus, Ohio. Check it out.
94.1.
94.1.
So those three people, and I'd like to make one further comment. One of the problems that the liberals have. I'm Randy Rhodes' favorite conservative Darwinian Republican.
Okay.
And I when I realized that W. Bush was a buffoon, I actually went to work for Howard Dean.
Yeah.
And I watched as the media, both sides, killed him with the Dean scream.
Yep.
So I have some background on what's going on.
I appreciate it. I want to take the pledge. I want to take the plug for WGRN and go even further. Each of these stations, certainly Free Speech TV, certainly the people who listen on WCPT, KPFK, all the stations that carry this radio program. Most of them have a story that is important. Most of them have a network of supporters that need to be thanked. Most of them have, if not advertisers, they might be non-commercial stations. They have members, they have supporters, they have donors. These are folks we got to thank, we got to appreciate. That if we want a media that is not only propaganda for the concentration of wealth and the concentration of ownership, then we got to share that stuff. And one of the ways we got to work together is by building that kind of media. That's what we've got to do. Human-based, pro-democracy media. And thank you so much to the people who do, to all of our affiliates, to all of those folks who carry this program to help make it happen. I assume, I know that Tom thanks also, but I know when he's doing it, it might seem, he's sort of thanking himself. It's his show. I have the chance to thank him. Let me tell you, it ain't possible without those stations. It ain't possible. We wouldn't be able to have any of these conversations if we weren't propping up those local organizations that say democracy matters here. If we're going to have a government that is in fact by, for, and of the people, then we've got to have media that is by, of, and for the people. And when I was a kid, like a suburban-style white kid that was angry and grumpy and entitled and not acknowledging my own privilege, and all I wanted was material benefit, I would have thought that conversation was hooey. That's what a bunch of hippies would say. But that's the real thing. If you just do the math, if you just do the arithmetic on what it's actually going to take for democracy to work, okay, I'll tell you one. Here's a good one. I don't have any chances yet, so I better tell you this one. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the game show? Was Regis Philbin who hosted Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and then it, changed? They have lifelines, right? They have, what are the lifelines? It's phone a friend, narrow it down to 2, or ask the audience. And a buddy of mine, law school classmate, we ended up clerking together. He paid his way through law school by being a 3-day champion on Wheel of Fortune. He's now a professor at University of Washington Law School. And we clerked at the dawn of Survivor and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, kind of the new era of game shows, right? And I didn't watch that stuff, but we would debrief it at lunch because I was fascinated by his analysis. I still am. And we would discuss Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he really wanted to get on that show. And we would debate what we thought the best lifeline was. And we both agreed that the best lifeline was, narrow it down to 2, that wasn't that good because they would just take out the ones that we wouldn't think it was. We both thought the best lifeline was phone a friend because we have friends. And we would just get our friends ready and say we'd have our physicist friend and our sports fan friend and our friend that, watched lots of plays and read a lot and our friend who knew architecture, and we'd have them ready. And if we got a question on that topic, well, we'd call our sports friend. We'd call our architecture friend. We are both wrong. The best lifeline is ask the audience. All of us are smarter than any of us. Now, there's an exception. If the contestant, before asking the audience, says, I think it might be B. I'm not sure. Let me ask the audience. Well, that skews the sample, and you can't trust the audience anymore. And one way of understanding what's happening with democracy, if we can call it that right now, is we have enormous pots of dough advancing their own financial self-interest, which are yelling, I think it might be B. and it's skewing the sample. But all of us are smarter than any of us. We can build a democracy supermajority. We can at least agree on that. Ernest from Albuquerque.
Albuquerque.
I know. I'm from Oregon, and I know it's Oregon, but go ahead, Ernest.
You talked about having sympathy the other day for Rush Limbaugh.
No, I said I mourn his life.
Well, anyway, I went to the gym. I go to this gym where there's a lot of white, upper middle class, old people and young people.
Yep.
And I was waiting for a machine, and got to talking to this guy. He was a young guy, about 30. And I don't know how it got up into politics, but we got into politics. And I told him, don't you think it's
you're cutting out.
Terrible?
Ernest?
Don't you think it's terrible that...
Ernest, I can't hear you. Correct your phone. I'm going to have to go to the next caller.
What about now?
I can't. I'm sorry, Ernest. You might try again from a different phone. Martin from Seattle, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. You had talked about free market, the term for that.
Yeah.
The real term for free market meant free of rentier income, which is unearned income. It's since been changed, of course, to be a market that, is falsely has no rules on it, which every market does.
Martin, could you send me a link on that? Could you send me something for me to read on that?
You can read it from Michael Hudson was the one I got it from.
Okay. That's really helpful.
He's written plenty of books about economy, so michael-hudson.com. I had one more thing I did want to say.
Go ahead.
I think so long as the Democrats follow policies of income redistribution and things like that, they're just going to be a wing of the Republican Party. What we really have to do is come up with brand new solutions from the ground up. And one of those solutions would be a public banking system.
Preach.
It would go right to the heart of where the center of power is in the Republican and the oligarchy, and it would basically allow us to...
Public banking, I appreciate it. We're at the
Listening
break.
to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I will respond to the public banking call in just a moment. I want to say something about public banking. That is another thing that you can advocate for in your town. That's another thing that could be won in city councils around the country. And you could make a little public bank or a medium-sized public bank. It could be a limited-purpose bank, one that was there to focus on housing loans, one to focus on renewable energy loans. Not one that you went in to just go to your ATM or whatever, but a limited-purpose bank. We can learn from the Dakotas. The power of that is such an important point. This idea that the primary way we should run government is merely through tax and transfer, merely through taxing income to fund services. That is not the only way to do it. We can actually have stuff that we share. We can do that by building co-ops. We can do that by having new ownership models for stuff. So we literally share wealth, not just by taking it from one person and giving it to someone else, but actually getting together to build things together. And government is one way we can do that. It could be one huge co-op where we get together and say, okay, now I don't want the government make my iPhone, right? Wouldn't mind it regulating it so I'm less likely to get cancer. But you know what we can do? The government as a bank, an insurance company, that's one of the best functions for the government that there is. The American government has been described as an insurance company defended by a standing army. And if you look at the federal budget, it's pretty close to that. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, those are large insurance programs. Add that to the military and then service and national debt, that pretty much is the American budget. And when we talk about value added, if somebody invents something, okay, well, that's a way you really add value. Insurance products, they don't really add value. Innovation in banking, anytime you hear innovation in banking, be wary, be nervous. Heard a lot about innovative products, innovation banking products, innovative loan tools, right before the economic crash. Innovation in things we actually make and use, heck yes. But government can do a decent job. Medicare has significantly better benefit ratio. Insurance people call it the loss ratio because they think that the service they provide is in fact a loss. Well, it's actually the benefit that you provide. It should let us know about the insurance industry that they call the service they provide the loss ratio. Medicare is vastly more efficient than the private insurance system. We can do that pretty well. Public banking is something we could win. It's a hard, president ain't going to get that done. Whether it's Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, what have you, they're not going to get that done. Congress is not going to do that. But you could get that done in towns. You get that done in cities. We have it happen in enough cities. We get it done in a couple of states. And then all of a sudden, it just provides a little bit of a balance. Provides the kind of thing that's a little less likely to get toppled during a crisis. Let's go to Kevin from Chicago, Illinois.
Hey, good day, Jefferson.
Hello, sir.
I'd like to talk about the vote in the Senate. And they kind of overstepped their bounds. Number one, of course, because the jury was working with the accused.
Yeah.
Which, of course, never happens. And then there was no documents and no witnesses. But, shortly before the vote and everything was all basically wrapped up, they said that what happened was unacceptable, inappropriate, but wasn't an impeachable offense. But that's not their job.
Well, it is their job to define what is impeachable.
No, that's not.
But saying that trying to corrupt a government to corrupt our elections isn't impeachable, that is a major claim. But Kevin, thank you so much.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
We're back. Well, folks, it's our big finish. Let's take our last couple of phone calls. David, if we can do it real fast because I want to have time to say goodbye. Go ahead, David from Richland, Washington.
Thank you there, Jefferson. Enjoying your talk there.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about, I read an article on Amy McGrath, if you remember. She is Mitch McConnell's challenger there.
Yep.
It was from Real Clear Politics, and in the article they speculated that she might be throwing the election. And my question is, in boxing, that used to be a real problem. The opponent would pay somebody to take a dive, or they'd extort them or threaten them or something like that, so the other one would. And furthermore, from what I hear, Stephanie McGrath's husband is Republican. Now, so Kellyanne Conway's husband, George, I forget what his name, and, both of them are pretty sincere in their beliefs. But is that a common problem, or have you heard much where somebody's political challenger will, threaten or try to bribe?
The one thing I did, hold on just a second, David. I hear some music in the background. That's music I think we want to wait for the last minute and a half of the show. But the thing I heard, I have not heard anything about Amy McGrath being a fake. Forgive me for that miscommunication earlier. I haven't heard anything about Amy McGrath being a false flag. I did hear about another candidate in a southern state who was being given a bunch of money by Republicans in order, but I don't think it was Amy McGrath. In fact, in this article I saw, I think it was an African American woman who I also don't think in herself was probably a false flag, but was given money by a bunch of Republicans, and the speculation was so they could sort of rig it. Let's be clear that everybody who calls in and has legitimate frustration at the center-left coalition party in this country, which we call the Democratic Party, you have legitimate frustration. Anybody who thinks that's your primary enemy, even people who are focused and concerned on what's happened in Iowa, remember what the caller here said. Remember what Rachel Maddow did on air. What she explained was that a lot of why that looked so bad was because there were trolls, because there were rat effers who were calling in to clog the phone lines to make it hard to report the votes. All right, that we have. This has been going on since the Nixon era. where they have where rat effers and trolls have turned their operating in politics to a high art. It is not, they do not wear that badge as a scarlet letter, but as a red badge of courage. That this explains much of Donald Trump's rhetorical choices. Oh, I can't imagine. Wouldn't the modern Republican Party be horrified that he says those kind of things? Well, a few people, but that is the essence of so much of the activist base, which is sort of go get you, sort of screw you, sort of talk in a way that shocks people, tear you down sort of thing, and the dirty trick sort of thing. We do have to watch for that very much. Rhoda, you got a very quick question. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thanks for all you had with Jefferson. My question is, does the president have a legal right to give the State of the Union address? Because I thought...
He does. Well, at least the Constitution calls for it. The Constitution does indeed call for a State of the Union. The Speaker of the House invites them to give the State of the Union there, and that's why there was that controversy and debate prior, and we can have a debate about that. But it is expected that there be a State of the Union, whether it's given at a trucker rally or whether it's given in the halls of Congress. How I want to finish, Karen was calling in wanting to urge the concept of guerrilla theater to educate people. Thank you, Karen. Brian and Jennifer wanted to decry. Brian wanted to decry having Bloomberg participate in debates, and Jennifer wanted to. He hasn't participated in debates yet. Is he participating tonight? I don't know. I should know that. I can look it up. I'm told he is not. And Jennifer from Stillwater is wanting more people to cover what is happening in Iowa and what she views as a rigging of the caucus. What I say is I hope that they will be relying on paper ballots. Let me finish this way. Yesterday was Gratitude Thursday. Thank you Thursday. We focused on what good stuff was happening out there that could fill us up, that could inspire us, that could make us feel grateful for what we're doing. I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful for having the chance to participate in this community, for sitting in for Tom. I'm grateful for the Thom Hartmann Show existing. I'm grateful to the team here who make sure the callers can get through, who make sure that the video can get played, who make sure that the show gets booked, and make sure we get to commercial. I am filled with gratitude. I also am thankful for democracy. To me, that is the big fight. That is the struggle. It's not just what color t-shirt we wear. It's not just what primary candidate we're rooting for. There's a struggle for democracy. And I'll finish this way. Whose job is democracy? So many of the challenges we face are nobody's job. Whose job is it to make sure that there is alternative media? Who's making huge money in that? In a market sense, what big company benefits from fundamentally improving our health system? Who profits in a major way from us getting less sick, not just curing that sickness? Whose job is it to save the climate? I know that if I drive my truck all over the place, it has very little impact on the air that I breathe and the water that I drink, but if we all do it, we're all screwed. So many of our most daunting challenges and exciting opportunities are, in a market sense, nobody's job. That's why they have to be all of our jobs. That's why you are so important. You're the coalition of the benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason, and you are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. Thanks to all of you, and thank you, democracy. I'm Jefferson Smith. Thom Hartmann will be back with you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.